Thank you to our previous session for opening up today's Digital Food and Beverage Online Summit. We're going to start this next session with OneSpace in just a moment, but before we do, I wanted to welcome any new folks tuning in. And if you're hanging around from the last session, glad you could stay with us. Just some quick in-house logistics for our newer attendees. You can move your windows around to fit whatever device you're using to listen today within the On24 platform. If you accidentally minimize a window, don't worry. Just pop into the menu dock at the bottom of your screen to bring it back up. There's also a Q&A portal on your screen, so feel free to ask away at any time during the presentation. We're joined today by Stephanie Leffler, the CEO of OneSpace. Today she'll be sharing unique insights into product content optimization. Take it away, Stephanie.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. Well, the slide you're looking at now is a snip from the presentation that I did live in Austin. And just to remind everyone who wasn't there, if you'd like to see that presentation, you can get to it by following this web address. And some of the things that we covered in that presentation are kind of predecessors or really good prerequisites for this 201 type of information. So just to refresh, some of the things we talked about there were how Amazon is very different than Walmart Grocery, Target, Sam's Club, Kroger, and some of the other grocer banners. So it's really important to define a grocery-specific strategy that's not only based on Amazon. And lots of detail in that presentation about how search differs across these different marketplaces and how the customer differs, as well as the functionality of the site. So I really encourage you to check that out if you're trying to build your organic strategy from the ground up. The other things we talked about in that presentation were how to get found and rank across all of these different retail websites, and also how to maximize conversion rate. So if you think about that presentation, it's really all about what to do from a content strategy perspective to create success. And so today, we're going to talk about a slightly different topic that really is important to being able to maximize your footprint across the web, which is managing and optimizing content across all of the retailers for all of your SKUs. And for anyone who's tried to do this, I'm sure you understand that this presents a huge challenge. And a big reason for that challenge is that in this particular space, we have so much data. Some people would say too much data, but it's a really unique problem, and you have to be able to manage data at scale in order to effectively optimize as many products as many CPG customers have in their portfolio across all of the retailers. So let me show you exactly what I mean. So the velocity of change is incredibly high. So let's assume that you're a company that maybe launches 300 new items. You update maybe 1,500 total updates across your portfolio, and that ultimately equals, call it 1,800 total updates a year. That seems pretty manageable, something that you could do with a small team. But you think to yourself, all right, I take those 1,800 updates and I'm going to push them out to all of the retailers that are most important to me. I'm going to syndicate that. Unfortunately, I would say syndication is the most misused term in e-commerce because retailers want to differentiate their content, and therefore every retailer is slightly different. They ask for different content, they have different requirements, and ultimately they're all trying to present the best consumer shopping experience, and it doesn't allow you to take the same content and syndicate it everywhere. So what we have to do, excuse me, is change our equation just a little bit. If we have 1,800 updates a year and we're focused on managing 10 customers, that's 18,000 pieces of e-content that needs to be deployed every year. Now all of a sudden we're starting to talk about scale. So at the end of the day, that 18,000 doesn't even account for changes driven by customers. That's just changes driven internally by your organization. So in order to win, you've got to be able to respond to competition in this changing landscape in real time, and you have to be able to do it at scale because of the volume of data that we're all dealing with. So many customers that we're working with choose a strategy that says, all right, well, let's fix our scale problem by focusing on, say, our top 100 SKUs. So let's look at our top 100 SKUs on 1 or 2 retailers. You know, most of our sales come from those SKUs anyway. However, this presents a really unique challenge. If you can't sell those SKUs, if you can't sell all of your SKUs online, if we can't get to all of our SKUs, then where are we going to sell them? Because online is the place where you can find these interesting, unique pockets of demand. But if your whole product portfolio isn't findable, then how are they ever going to grow in sales? So if you think about a really basic search phrase like shredded sharp cheddar natural cheese 16-ounce pouch, that's a pretty normal search. When you look at that, you're actually hitting multiple pockets of demand. You're finding consumers who are searching for shredded cheese. They want sharp cheese. They want natural ingredients, a certain pack size. So if this particular SKU happens to fall outside of your top 100, by not optimizing, you're leaving tons of opportunity on the table. Online is the place to match demand with supply. Supply being your products, demand being search. And so if you're not optimizing your full portfolio, I think it just begs the question of why are we making the products in the first place? And there might be cause for a SKU rationalization exercise. But if you have these products to offer, this is the place to optimize and find those niche customers. So let's think about your product strategy slightly differently. We want to really take your portfolio and divide it into 3 baskets. Let's say we have our top SKUs, our most important, highest competition and traffic keywords and SKUs. We want our best SKUs to compete for those hardest to win keywords. Second, we've got our mid portfolio. So the place where we have our products that aren't our blockbusters, but certainly contribute solidly to sales every month. We want to take our medium range keywords, so keywords that sit in the middle, that have moderate traffic, where there's not a ton of competition, but they produce enough volumes so that you should be paying attention to them. And we want to pair our mid portfolio with our midstream keywords. And then last but not least, as you look, this pyramid continues to get bigger. So the vast majority of keywords today sit in this long tail bucket. Low volume, very specific, but there's tons of them. So if you think about your product portfolio, if you do a smart job matching keywords to products, your long tail in your product portfolio can take advantage of this. So it's just about being able to find the right keyword to match with the right product. And all of a sudden, you can start to bring power to some of those SKUs that you thought on the physical shelf might have been dead. You have to remember that this is a place where customers can find the very specific things that they want. So in the grocery space, I do see a lot of customers who think, hey, we don't sell very much of this every year, but you have to remember that you're looking at brick and mortar sales to make those decisions in many cases. And brick and mortar has limited shelf space with limited visibility. So if you have a big portfolio, this is the place to take it to the consumer. The reason I really think we're kind of missing the boat is that when we do ROI calculations, we see it's pretty tough to calculate an ROI metric that isn't a winning metric online. What I mean by that is you have to only increase your sales by a small percentage in order to produce positive ROI on a content investment. So what that tells me is that we're doing this top 100 SKUs exercise because we don't have enough time, we don't have enough resources, not because we don't have enough money. Because I think if we sat down and did the math, we'd find that it's a winning equation almost every time. And I'll talk a little bit more about KPIs as we get into this presentation, but I am happy to share this ROI calculator if it's something that you're interested in. You can shoot us an email at OneSpace. You can send it to steph@onespace.com, and I'll be happy to share this Excel file with you. But this is a really good way to think about how a content investment can create a return for your company. So if it's not math that's holding us back, I do think we're constrained by scalability. So what I'd like you to imagine is a day where we're not constrained by scalability and we can really think about content and content builds based on where there's demand in the search landscape. and where there's opportunity. So maybe there's not competition. Maybe we make higher profit on a certain set of items. There are a number of reasons that we should focus on a particular piece of content or, a product to optimize. But I would say that time is not the constraint that we want to use to make our decisions. So how do we do this? How do we do this at scale? What are some of the things you should be thinking about? And this is a question I get every day because I think we often really think in terms of projects, not process. So let's spend a couple of minutes talking about this. As I mentioned before, my last presentation was all about how to get found and how to get purchased. This presentation is all about how to do this at scale. So let's focus on that today. So lots of our customers, when we start talking about scale, we do a whiteboarding exercise where we're mapping out, hey, let's talk about how does content get created in your organization? Who are the different players? What are the teams? How do things get passed from one person to the next? And the diagram that we end up with often looks like this. So this is because we do think about e-commerce in terms of mini projects. Let's optimize 100 SKUs on this retailer, or let's build mobile hero images today, or put enhanced content on our top 20 SKUs tomorrow. Those sorts of projects are never going to help us win because there's always a huge list of projects that we can do. But what we're not doing is putting together a mathematically driven process that pushes the right content into focus at the right time. So bear with me for a second and let me walk you through a simple analogy. So in the CPG world, in the grocery world, we've been doing this process that you see on the screen for a very long time. We've been taking raw materials, we've been putting them through a plant or running them across an assembly line, packaging shop, and ultimately we create finished products that get stored in a warehouse. We organize that warehouse meticulously. We make sure that everything is exactly where we don't want it to go so that we can then load it onto trucks at the right time, ship it to our destinations, and then we look at how our sales performing and we make decisions about what products we're going to keep making, what we're going to add, what we're going to discontinue. So this process runs with a high degree of rigor. Now let's equate this to what a digital shelf process might look like. It's actually really the same thing at its heart. So our raw materials is product data. We have images, we have attributes, we have descriptions. We need to take those pieces of data and run them through a structured content production process. Think about this as your assembly line for content. Who does what? We pass everything from one person to the next in an orderly way. Then we need to store this content in a PIM or a DAM or both. We need to store it in a very neat and organized way so that we know exactly where to go to get each piece of information when it's time to package it up and ship it to our online retailers using an API or even a spreadsheet. And then we need to analyze this data and do this again and again. But unfortunately, inside of CPG today, this process in many cases is non-existent. You know, how many times can you imagine in a traditional setting if you were going to roll a new product off the production line and everybody is there that day, all the raw materials have been assembled, and all of a sudden you realize that the labels aren't ready and they're not there and loaded into the machine? Like, those sorts of things just don't happen on the physical shelf. But on the digital shelf, I can't tell you how many times we've gotten to the point that we're ready to deploy new content for a customer and they realize that the images aren't ready or they're missing a piece of the ingredient data. And then they don't even know where to go to get it. So the warehouse is completely disorganized. In fact, I would say it's usually many silos as opposed to one warehouse. You know, people are saying, oh, okay, well, let's start sending some emails and figure out if we can determine who has the ingredient information. So these are some challenges that the whole industry has that we need to solve. And I think putting a process in place like this is the first step. So let's build upon this analogy. At the end of the day, what we're trying to create is a process where we have mass driving action. We've got centralized storage where we can keep everything organized. We can distribute it to the most important retailers, and then we can analyze it. So today, we're going to focus in on kind of the first two parts of this diagram that you see here, and I'll talk through those with you. So the first part I wanted to focus on are workflows. So imagine as you're building your content production line, that assembly line of sorts, we need to start defining workflows. So what do we do if our most important number one ranking keyword, number one ranking product drops in ranking? For some customers in high velocity areas, one product dropping in rankings can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a day in sales. So ask yourself, how do you know if your most important ranking has just dropped? And then what do you do about it? So that's a really small thing you can take away from today's presentation. Start to build those thoughts around, hey, what am I going to do if my rank changes? How do we manage a packaging update workflow? Because the nice thing is that all of these actions or triggers are things that happen every day, and you can build your action items in a structured way so that you don't have to think about each time these things happen, what needs to happen as a result. You can have a predefined plan of attack. So workflows are a big piece of this. The other part that's important to think about are the triggers. So what happens that kicks off these workflows? So as we talk about triggers with customers, we usually divide these into two groups. So there are internal triggers at the bottom here in blue. So they're pretty easy to understand. So, you're rolling out a new innovation item, or you have a renovation, or a packaging change, or case pack configuration, an ingredient change. These are all sorts of change that occur every day within your organization. Every one of those changes have impact on the digital shelf. So it's really simple to think about each of those and define, okay, well, if this happens, what parts of the digital shelf change? Who do I need to involve? But we also have things happening outside the organization. So we've got seasonality coming into play, where all of a sudden the search landscape shifts because people are using different words to search for the same ththings. We have ranking changes. We have competitors optimizing their products to try to dethrone your listings. We have keywords that have never before been seen. We take the keto diet trend, for instance, was not even visible 3 years ago, and last year it was the single most searched term within the snack space. So things like that are places where if you're not paying attention to what's happening and you don't have a plan of attack, you can get left behind. So another good takeaway is to sit down and think through, okay, what are the triggers for my organization and what are the actions I want to take? Another really good tool that I'll share with you is a very basic Excel spreadsheet that we've built to try to help people understand what types of change might occur and what the impact to the digital shelf might be. So this is not going to be right for your organization. Once again, this is another spreadsheet I'm willing to share if you're interested. You can shoot me an email, steph@onespace.com, and I'll be happy to send this to you. But what we've done here is start to list the various types of change that might be driven by your organization. And then we go through what the content impact of each of those types of change might be. We think about who needs to do approvals, what tools might be impacted, and then how do we actually want to get this content out to the digital shelf. So your types of change might be different, your content impacts might be different, but the structure of this sheet can be the very same to give you a good framework to start to think about these things and share within your organization. So let's go through a few more tips for optimizing at scale. First, I think if you build a retailer capabilities grid, you'll find this to be very helpful. As I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, every retailer has different requirements. So as you're building content, we really want to be thinking about building for, I'm going to call it our highest common denominator. I can't tell you how many companies I go into and I say, hey, how do you build content? And they say, well, we've pretty much built our content for Amazon, and then we take that content and we push it out to all the other retailers. But there are some huge misses if we're just building content for Amazon. For instance, Walmart supports 4,000 characters in their description, whereas Amazon supports 2,000. Walmart, and actually it's amazing how fast things change, Walmart just increased their total image count in the carousel to 18. Amazon supports max of 7 in most categories. You've got bullets that are 255 each on Amazon, max of 1,000 characters. Walmart has a totally different schema. So the point here is that you need to be thinking about each field and who offers the most functionality. Build your master content around that. It's much easier to adapt down than trying to build up. So this retailer's capability grid can really help. The next thing you should do is think about your content plan or content strategy at a category level. So don't reinvent the wheel every time you write a description for a product. We can look at search data and understand exactly what the most important features or benefits of every category are to a consumer. So you can kind of think about search like a mind map. What we're looking at here is an aggregate graph of search terms across the coffee space. And it's showing us that flavor is the most searched term, most searched topic within coffee. So we know that if our coffee has flavor, we're going to talk about it, but this is something that consumers search heavily for. You might want to even think about using different names for the flavor. So instead of just saying vanilla, you might want to mention vanilla beans. You might want to mention French vanilla if it's French vanilla. There's lots of variants, and if you know that people are searching heavily around flavor, you should think about including those things. You might not think to include the caffeine profile if this is a caffeinated coffee, but you might want to say caffeinated. You might want to say highly caffeinated if it is. Those are some of the things that people search heavily for that traditional coffee descriptions would lack. So the point is, build your category plan, and then all of the SKUs that sit within coffee can use this same plan as you're building their content. When you do think about content, you should build a category guide that doesn't just outline what roughly we're going to talk about, here are the bullet points, but really dig into what do we need to tell a consumer in order for them to buy our coffee. And the reason we recommend building a category guide that's this detailed, that goes through how to write the category name, how to include the right subcategories, how do we talk about features, what are the images. This is so that you can scale your content operation. If you don't write guidelines at this level of specificity, what you're going to find is that you can't ever bring somebody in quickly. You're going to have to really instill a ton of tribal knowledge across the next writer in order to get them to perform at the same level that you do or that your team does. So writing these guides is a huge win for long-term scalability. And as we share this presentation, you can kind of dive in at this Zoom view and really see some of the ways that we write these guides and examples. You should think about the same thing for images. For each category, build your ideal carousel and then execute all of the SKUs in the category against this guideline. Use the same data that you use to build your content category guide for your image category guide. You can see every single image should be outlined with very specific details. Once again, this allows you to bring on additional designers and help scale your process quickly. Another thing to think about as you're building your strategy is to make sure you have a parent and child product thought process built in. So what I mean by this is I have lots of customers who come and say, hey, I have 500 SKUs in my catalog, but it's actually really only 50. And I always ask what they mean, because what they're trying to say here is that they have a parent SKU. So think of it as our, we'll go to our coffee example. Let's say it's our house blend whole bean coffee. But that house blend whole bean coffee comes in a half a pound bag, a 1 pound bag, a 2 pound bag, and a 5 pound bag. Well, that's great. But those are different SKUs. When the brand managers built those different pack sizes, they built them to satisfy different use cases, different consumer needs, and different occasions. So what we would recommend is rolling those products together where your house blend whole bean is your parent, and then each pack size is your child. However, we're not going to recommend duplicating all of the content across all of those children. You can do this in a very smart way. So imagine you take your title, and of course that's going to be unique for each of those products, but your bullet 1 through 3 might be unique. So you're going to talk about the pack size and why the consumer would want that particular pack size. You can optimize for the terms that are searched for that pack size. But bullet 4 through 10 might be able to be identical across those SKUs, where you're talking about the house blend and how it tastes, or where it's grown, or how it's roasted. Those are commonalities across those products. So if you think about this on a per field basis, you can put the best of both worlds together. Now, the reason I say it's very important to optimize at the child level and make sure there is some unique content is because in the search landscape, we see tons of queries that look like this. So family-sized chips, or pillows for sleeping 4-pack, small bottle of water. If we're rolling up all of our packaging sizes and our small variants to a parent level, we're going to miss all of this specific consumer search. Now, one other thing to think about is these searches, these real specific queries, are the most likely to end in a purchase. And there's conversion strategy that goes back to the early days of Google that says, hey, the less specific the search, the less likely of a buyer this customer is. So if I'm searching for Nike shoes, I'm probably just browsing. And then I search for Nike shoes red, I'm getting a little closer. All of a sudden, my next query is Nike shoes red and a model number, and I'm very close. As soon as I add my size, you know you have a buyer. So think of these queries as maybe lower volume, but incredibly valuable because of how high they convert. So don't leave these behind. So in summary here, what I would recommend as you're thinking about content creation is create your content at once. The reason I've been making this argument from the beginning to not focus on just 100 SKUs and to make a scalable process is because the customers that I see having the most success on the digital shelf are the ones who build a scalable factory for content that allows them to actually build optimized content for their full portfolio for all of the retailers that they care about. You will find that it eliminates an unbelievable amount of internal confusion and internal cost to know that all SKUs that are online should have your best content. The reason I say that is I'm sure you get calls every day with somebody calling you and saying, hey, I'm on Walmart's page and I'm looking at the 2-count pack and it looks great, but there's a 4-count pack listed right next to it and it has these old images. What happened there? Well, I assure you what happened there is the 2-count pack is a highly selling item. The 4-count pack is a lesser SKU, and that company made the decision to prioritize the 2-count pack. But everybody forgets that they sit on the page next to each other. So all of that internal communication that goes on around, hey, why are we missing images here? Or what's wrong with this description there? Imagine if everybody knew what all the pages were supposed to look like and could be working together and not trying to answer those questions. That cost savings alone could pay for your content effort for the year. So the efficiency of not doing this piecemeal. Don't build 4 images for your carousel today and then add another 4 tomorrow. Think of how inefficient it is for a designer to go and find the Photoshop files, reopen the files, remember what they were working on, look at what was built before, try to recreate that process. If you just build 8 carousel images or 12 carousel images in a single shot, you're going to find that your long-term cost is significantly less. So I'm really passionate about this because I'm convinced that there is a much better way for companies and for consumers to have all the information they need to make a purchase if we can all get on the same page that it's a priority to build our content operation to effectively satisfy the digital shelf. So last up here, remember, if you want to go back and look at how to get found, how to get purchased, take a look at that presentation from Austin. What we just talked about today are the basics of how to get things done at scale. I'm certainly happy to share more tips and tricks on workflows and some of the other things we just touched on today. But I appreciate your presence, and I'm happy to answer some questions at this point.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. So I think that we have time for one of the questions. So earlier in the presentation, you said that retailers change their templates an average of 15 times a year. How do you recommend staying up to date on these changes so that we can proactively prevent issues, publishing content, and make sure we're taking advantage of these new features?
So you kind of have 2 choices here. Your first choice is to build relationships with each retailer. Some companies I've seen have a specialist in their e-commerce group whose sole job it is to liaison with the sales team and the retailers to make sure that they understand exactly what each retailer wants, how that retailer's website functions, and most importantly, how they can know when updates are coming. So it can be, I would say at least a half-time job. Depending on the number of retailers that you're focused on and managing, it can absolutely be a full-time job. The other choice is, if you're working with an agency or you're working with a software vendor, I would lean on them to surface changes to you. I think that, as vendors in the space, it's our responsibility to know the space inside and out and to be able to provide that information to all of our customers. So I think asking the vendors to participate in your vendor landscape is another good bet. But just be sure that these things are changing all the time. You saw it in just 1 minute, in the week that it took us to build this presentation, Walmart went from allowing 14 images to 18 images in their carousel. So what are you doing about that change today? Do you have 14? Are your graphic designers already aware and starting to build the additional images for the products that are the most important? If you're not, I think that should raise some questions for you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. This presentation has been really insightful, and I'm afraid that that's all the time we have for questions today. And that concludes this session with OneSpace. I just want to thank you so much to our speaker, Stephanie. This was a great presentation, and we all learned a lot. If you submitted a question that we didn't get to, don't worry. We'll follow up with you by email shortly. Stick around because we've got another great session coming up all about the truth about personalization.